Good morning, Claire, and welcome back to the New Possibilities Hour. We so appreciate your willingness to be here and share your wisdom with us and to support the Will Work for Food project. We give every speaker an opportunity to talk about a food bank that's important to them and encourage our audience to contribute to that food bank if they're in a position to do so. Claire, would you tell us a bit, please, about the food bank that is important to you?
Sure. Yeah, I support the Holy Family Giving Bank in South Pasadena. I went to Holy Family throughout from kindergarten to 8th grade, and I went to the church there. And I worked there throughout my childhood, and it supports the surrounding communities of South Pasadena. So it's near and dear to my heart.
That's wonderful. And the URL is holyfamily.org/giving-bank. That's holyfamily.org/giving-bank. And now, Claire, we're so happy to have you back to talk about what's happened with civil juries as a result of the pandemic and lockdown. You were with us last summer and you gave us tremendous insights as to what was going on, not only in California, here where we live, but more broadly. And we're so happy that you've agreed to come back and give us an update.
Yeah.
So with that, the floor is yours.
Well, it's been an interesting time. I'm glad you reached out because there have actually been trials since we last talked. And I've been lucky enough to actually be in a trial just a couple days ago. So I have some fresh and new input from an actual experience and not just the hypothetical situation. So I think that everyone is, clamoring for the actual real life in trial experience. And so I think I can give you a little bit of that today. So I think that's great timing.
Great. Well, please update us. What do lawyers need to know about the changes in civil juries, and what do mediators need to know in order to be most helpful?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think that every lawyer first, let me start quickly with saying, first of all, everyone needs to realize that trials are imminent. I think that for the last 365 or 380 days or whatever it was of this pandemic, trials have been sort of in the distance and no one really knew when they were going on. But now we are here. Trials are going. They will be going. So be prepared to have them actually go. My venue that I was at was Orange County. And even though they really are slow going to start, there are a lot of trials backed up. Everybody is fully intent to get them started. And so once we were there, the ball was rolling. I would say that because there is such a backlog, I've noticed that the judge in the trial was very intent on getting our trial started. And so the kind of hardships, cause challenges, stuff that might ordinarily let a juror get off, he was not granting because he was so adamant about, like, these jurors are going to be here for a few days. This is really hard on them because of just, kids at home or, having been unemployed for the pandemic or what have you. But rather than be gracious and give them more hardship, he just said, let's just get this going and not waste their time. So, that was not ideal. I would have preferred to have had people who didn't want to be there be let go. But I guess he was of the idea that the most important thing right now is time saving and being as efficient as possible. So that's what we did. Let's see. The trial experience was very interesting because because of the COVID protocols, it's not your standard courtroom experience with the fact, of course, the social distancing and the masks, and everybody had to wear masks, even the attorneys who were questioning, of course, you're only seeing, this much of somebody's face, which is really very hard to get used to, but I think everybody is getting more like more practiced in communicating with their eyes. I mean, I do feel like a lot of people make more effort to smile so that you can see it through their eyes, and because people are still trying to the same people who want to connect they're still connecting. It's just a little different than what we're used to. Of course, the courtroom itself, you have to be prepared to pivot, communicate with the entire courtroom, because your jury is not just in a box anymore. I mean, there were 15 jurors from, so not only are you having to look and see them, they're watching you from behind. I mean, there's a whole nother layer, to how this goes. And you're going to have to be much more prepared to be flexible and project, be prepared to expound to the entire audience, because it's very hard to hear back there. That's going to be a huge problem until the social distancing and the masks are reduced, because I mean, for sure, communication will be tough until those parameters are limited. But I'm trying to think of what other questions you had, Jeff. You said you wanted to know. Did you want to know more about the actual?
Well, let's talk about the psychology of the jurors. Are they? Do they seem attentive? Do they seem distracted? What is the whole experience for lawyers trying to communicate with these people?
Yeah. So first of all, I found it very interesting that I had almost zero county or government employees, which I can't, and I have no idea if there is any rhyme or reason to that. But almost everyone I had was the kind of person who would not be paid for jury duty, which is like less than ideal for sure. But as it regards to logically affected, I mean, there were varying degrees. There were many people who did not seem to be bothered any more than they would have been normally to be in jury duty. I mean, no one loves jury duty. You always have like only 3 jurors who are appreciated. Everybody else just seems, like they want to be somewhere else. But the one that really, really resonated with me were the teachers. I had teachers on my panel, and I had a doctor on my panel. And doctors aren't usually good plaintiff jurors anyway, but the doctor was adamant that this, it was going to be an enormous hardship for her to be here, that she's just been, like ER helper. She's an OBGYN, but she's only been helping with the COVID effort during this entire pandemic, and she can finally do surgeries. She's had surgery patients who've been waiting for a year for surgeries, and she was adamant that she could not be a fair juror in this trial. She could not focus. She wants to get back to helping her patients that need her help. And when the judge denied her hardship, she was very, very angry. Whereas the teachers are often very great jurors, and like just they love to learn about things. They're very eager, enthusiastic people. The teacher was sobbing in jury duty about how her little kids have had a whole year of trying to be on Zoom, and how the children in her class every day is a struggle, and she feels like she has to handhold them more than she ever has. And she said that it's been the hardest of her 20 years of teaching has been this last year. And she couldn't even fathom having to be a juror and had to leave her kids, because she feels like she's been their only lifeline during this period. So that was interesting and very sad. She wasn't let go either, so we had to, she ultimately ended up being, a peremptory was used on her. So she did not end up on the jury. But that I noticed that was interesting about the timing of my trial is people are starting to plan vacations again. It's just now there's enough people who are vaccinated, or, at least feeling like the cases have gone down. So we were dealing with a lot of vacations, and the judge was not granting them. So ordinarily a judge should grant a vacation, but because this is only like a 4-day trial, I think he didn't think it was as big a deal. Mm-hmm. But definitely, from what I've heard about other attorneys who've actually had judges grant hardships, they've gone through tons of jurors. Whether it be my kids are at home and I can't be here, I have a vacation planned, you know, it's been, and there's been, I think there's some actual COVID related screening in the jury room, but with just in the courtroom screening, it's, yeah, I think you go through a lot. I know there's a jury section in Orange County that's been going for over a week, and they've just been running through jurors, but that's a longer trial than ours was. So, I mean, that being said, did I feel like I had a jury that was angrier than your average jury? No. I mean, the venue is tough as it is for plaintiffs, but I mean, there have been some significant jury awards since the pandemic has started. So for anyone who's worried that, you know, jury awards will be zero after dealing with the coronavirus, I don't think that's true. I mean, there was, I think, a close to $50 million award in Florida. I know that my husband worked on a case in Missouri. There was a $15 million award, which was 3 times the county record. Before that, a friend of mine just got a $3 million in Orange County on a head injury. I mean, I think that a lot of people are very sensitive to certain things that maybe they weren't sensitive to before. If you had a head injury and you can't leave your house and enjoy yourself, you know, because it's too hard for you to be out in bright sunlight, or the stimulation is, I mean, they understand that now. I don't want to be stuck in my house, you know, or a little more sensitive to loss, sensitive to sadness, mental illness, all those kinds of things. I mean, I think that it's just a little more in everybody's, they can't push it out of their minds as much as maybe they could have before, because everybody's been living it, you know, for the last 189 days or whatever it is.
So we don't want to overgeneralize, but would you say on the one hand that some jurors have become more sensitive? Have other jurors become less sensitive? Are there also jurors who say, you're complaining about this after what society has been through?
For sure. And, you know, I usually have the lawyers ask that I've dropped, you know, sort of does anybody here think that your waste is a waste of our time in a time like this to be sitting on a jury as a jury on a slip ball, you know, like that kind of thing. And I think that is very much a feeling. I think that jurors have become more polarized, you know, and I think the politics of the last, you know, 4 or so years I mean, that's just been a trend we've seen in people in general. You know, there's just been a big larger divide between people. And I think that sort of falls in the same category with jurors, actually. You know, people who are angry are angrier. I think the people who are willing to be sympathetic are more sympathetic. I mean, honestly, as a jury consultant, if people are angrier, I'll take that, because they'll probably be more willing to get off for cause, you know? So if you're so I like that. I'd rather use a cause challenge than use a strike. So if you're going to be more willing to tell me how much this stinks for you, well, then please tell me. That's our job.
Well, so you generally work on the plaintiff side, right, Claire?
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So these moods, these polarizations, these angers, do they tend to be pro-plaintiff or pro-defense? And what impact does it actually have in the jury if you have people, you know, red state jurors and blue state jurors on the same, in the same jury? Do they get along less well? What's happening?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question with many different ways I think you could answer it. First of all, people who are angry, I guess the question is, what are you angry at, right? So if you're angry at being here as a juror, you're not good for the plaintiff. You know, if you're willing to be angry at corporations or at, you know, safety policies that weren't being followed, or regulations that weren't being followed, or, you know, somebody's needs not being met or something, then you're a great plaintiff juror, right? But that kind of thing, the being angry at jury duty, that I was just referring to, that is a defense juror. And that's like, I mean, every defense lawyer who's ever tried a case will tell you that they love to have it when jurors complain about being on jury duty. Like they're not going to touch them, you know. But now, as to the question of red state versus blue state on your jury, you know, I find that very interesting because up until maybe 5 years ago, you didn't really know somebody else's political affiliation, right? I mean, you would just talk to them like they were your neighbor or your friend, and the politicization of like the media, you know, our former president, who sort of made it like a badge of honor to sort of go out and fight others based on your political views. I mean, that's a recent thing. I mean, I see, and that's on Facebook, social media. I don't see any reason for that to come out between jurors in just your standard everyday conversation being on a jury, unless someone felt like they needed to, because it's just not how normal people operate. You know what I mean? Unless someone like, I know someone told me that they had a jury where a man wore a shirt to jury duty saying, "Shoot first, ask questions later." Okay, that person wants people to know what he thinks, you know. But other than that, I mean, or like someone who's wearing a huge American flag on their shirt or something like that. Those people are trying to tell you. I've never seen a "Make America Great Again" hat in court. I can't imagine that I would, but I'm sure if I did, then you'd have the same sort of situation there too. But other than that, I think people are usually pretty, in just your normal everyday conversations, they don't bring it up.
Does it come up though through voir dire? We used to, you know, such questions as what newspaper do you read?
Right.
What cable TV news network do you watch? There are so many things now that seem to be politicized. Sports is politicized. Entertainers are known for being outspoken on one side of the aisle or the other. Do you advise lawyers to find out those sort of things? And
no, not generally. I mean, if there was something where that was for some reason a very critical point, I don't know, like I was suing the Republican Party or something, then I would bring it up. But I feel like you have to be very careful in voir dire to ask questions that don't seem targeted or manipulative. You know, it has to be something that jurors don't. If you're going to do any sort of preconditioning or fact finding that is based on some sort of, you know, philosophy, it has to be not obvious. And I feel like when you come out with a what TV station do you listen to? Do you listen to Fox News? There's only one agenda. You know, and you have to be very careful to not mark one of your jurors as being a target, you know, if they aren't fully aware of it, right? So if I had a good juror or a seemingly good juror, and then I asked him, do you listen to Fox News? He knows where I'm going with that. He knows that if I pick that out, that I'm probably not a Fox News fan. And he's feeling like, oh, I'm now the other. Do I want jurors to feel like I'm singling them out as the other? Not really. I don't. You know, and I've heard that. I've had jurors that I've seen at focus groups who have told me before, oh, I hated being in jury duty. I felt like the lawyer was just trying to figure out who we voted for and what our political leanings were. And I thought it was really offensive. And I agree. What does their political leaning have to do with the case? You know, I mean, I think that a carefully worded case can win over either party, as long as they're not, you know, angry anti-lawsuit individuals, right? You can be a Republican and still understand that there's a place for a lawsuit or a place for, you know, to keep your community safer. Does a lawyer have to change their wording and their themes to a very conservative jury? Yes, they do. You have to acknowledge that for sure. I mean, you cannot, a jury in Santa Monica does not get the same opening and closing and arguments that a jury in Riverside would. If you're doing that, you're not doing it. You're not doing it correctly.
Claire, let me ask you, since you do practice nationally, and you've already
Yes.
mentioned working on cases in different states around the country, is it the same in other places? And of course, we have an international audience as well. You mentioned two parts of Southern California that are maybe 30
Right.
miles away from each other.
Right.
In other states and even in other countries, can you go 10 miles away, 20 miles away, and find very different kinds of jury pools?
Well, of course you can. I mean, even just the very difference between an urban and a rural jury. I mean, they can produce very different outcomes. Yes, I have picked juries in Philadelphia and in Scranton, Pennsylvania. They're both in the same state. They're very, very different. I mean, Philadelphia is more what you would expect from an urban, diverse community. Scranton is very, very blue collar, conservative. I mean, blue collar and conservative is probably the proper way to describe it. I'm trying to think if there's any other ways to describe it, but much more salt of the earth kind of people. It's just they're just different, very different results, and they're not that far away from each other.
So is it still the case, Claire, that remember it always being conventional wisdom that plaintiffs would rather have people who tend to be more liberal, perhaps more aligned with the Democratic Party, and Republicans, older jurors, more conservative jurors tend to be more defense oriented? Is that conventional wisdom? Was it ever true? Is it still true? Is it more or less true today?
It's so hard for me to say that because I try so hard to not limit my analyses to demographics. I really do. If a lawyer, that's the first thing a lawyer tells me every time when they're on a phone call. So what do you think about this case? Would I like women? Would I like men? Would I like Republicans? Would I, younger, older, and married? I've had lawyers tell me that they think the worst jurors are unmarried women. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Have you ever seen the gamut of unmarried women? You've got to be kidding me, but I think that your case should always rely on the themes of your case and the experiences that a person has that would gauge how they feel about your case. First and foremost, if you are not given any voir dire time, or you're in a federal case where you're given 10 minutes or the judge does all the questioning, then yes, you have to rely on demographics, I guess. But if you're given voir dire, you ask the questions that are pertinent to your case and you judge based on that. Let's see, if I had a young Hispanic juror, someone, and I'm assuming liberal because they're young and Hispanic, let's just say just graduated from college, and I have an old white lady, and if I had a PI case and the young Hispanic juror doesn't think you should ever have to award emotional distress damages, and the old white lady says that she thinks that she can't even imagine having to be hurt like that, and that sounds terrible, and of course you can, your health is the most important thing to you, who would I choose? I would choose the old white lady. I wouldn't choose that young Hispanic, unless, of course, the old white lady said a lot of really bad things otherwise. But in just those two instances, she's a better juror. Yes, I think conservative jurors, ultra conservative jurors, are worse.
Old what jurors?
Ultra conservative jurors are worse than your average juror. But ultra liberal jurors, not great either. I used Santa Monica as an example earlier. Santa Monica,
for viewers, again, for our
California.
Santa Monica, California, by the coast, tends to be thought of as a very liberal community.
It's liberal to the point that there are people who, refill their own bottles so they don't have to reuse plastic bottles, that kind of thing. That's right. Just how lots of vegans.
I mean,
that they're very
Tom Hayden of the Chicago Seven represented Santa Monica in the California legislature for several years. It's that kind of community.
right. Not a lot of high verdicts out of Santa Monica. Santa Monica Courthouse is a very tough courthouse for plaintiffs. Okay, so I mean, I know a lot of plaintiff personal injury lawyers where if they got Santa Monica Courthouse, they would consider getting rid of it and go trying to get another jury. Okay, so ultra liberal, not exactly, does not mean I'm going to give you a lot of money. Not at all.
Why is that?
I don't know. I mean, I like to kind of opine it as people who are sort of globally, they're kind of globally like philanthropic, but they're not like, not to your normal person in their, like in their area. It's sort of that, like they care about Darfur, you know, but they don't want to like give money to their neighbor, you know. And I feel like they also tend to be like, that area is also tended to be like super educated. So they're also, I mean, it can be, they're very analytical jurors, you know. So sometimes they, you know, a lot of them make a lot of money, and making a lot of money does not necessarily mean they're going to give a lot of money. I mean, I'm sure you've seen a person like that where you can kind of think, oh yeah, you know, this TV executive who might have voted for every Democratic president probably is not going to be a good juror for you. I mean, you can picture that, you know. So I wouldn't say liberal versus conservative really means much of anything, you know, in a case, unless the case really, for some reason, had something that was very politics related. It was a very important matter in the case. You know, some sort of tenet of a political party was an important part of the case. I don't really think it has much to do with how I pick a jury, at least. So I've never asked the questions about.
In what kinds of cases would political beliefs or affiliation be important?
Okay, well, what if someone had an abortion? I mean, that would be the first thing I could think of right away. I've had to, or unfortunately, I did have a case with openly gay, married to a woman married to a woman client who looked, I mean, there was no hiding the fact that she was an openly gay woman, you know, and in a very conservative venue that didn't play well for her. She would have done way better in San Francisco or something where, you know, that where she was more their peer than the conservative venue that she was in. And so that's another one where I can think of those two right at the top of my head, you know, that is kind of, unfortunately, it's just kind of a part of the fabric of the two different parties, you know, and that kind of leads into the judgment of the plaintiff. Yeah. So I'm sure there are more, but off the top of my head, it's, you know, this early in the morning, that's what I can think of.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What about social media? You know, during the lockdown, a lot of people have spent a lot more time on social media. I know I have.
Yeah.
Do you do research into jurors? Do you look at their Facebook, their LinkedIn, their Instagram, try to find things out about them?
I do a fair amount. I wouldn't say that I spend, you know, 15 hours after a court day.
No, you're too busy on your own social media, right?
You know, honestly, with the savvy social media users, especially younger people, you can't see much of anything. They privatize their social media to the point that all you might see is a profile photo. You know, I've actually had, and then with a juror whose name is, I don't know, Mike Johnson. Like, I mean, if you're going to search that on Facebook, how many Mike Johnsons are you going to find? Right?
Hundreds.
Yeah. So, I mean, to really weigh, you know, like the benefits, the cost benefits of the amount of time you might have to sift through the Mike Johnsons. You know, I might go after people. I would use it for people I have a question mark in my mind on. You know, I didn't hear so much from this person, and I feel like maybe they were purposely being quiet. Like, let me look her up. Or, you know, like we had a juror during jury selection that was sitting there smiling, juror number 1, but did not say much at all. And the lawyer was asking her questions. She didn't really respond with anything, but it's, it's okay. And then when the defense counsel questioned her, she said, "Oh, I've been an insurance adjuster for 18 years before I changed to this job." And I mean, had I not heard that, who knows? Could she have been on the jury? I'm not sure. So for someone like that, looking up her LinkedIn, which I could have done that evening had the defense counsel not asked, like that would have been very important. But my advice if you're going to look someone up on LinkedIn, have a throwaway, have a burner LinkedIn account, have some sort of
because you can see who it is.
Yeah, have a fake name.
Checked out your profile.
Yeah.
Don't
use yours.
Is that ethical? I mean, are you allowed to do that?
I think it might fall within a gray area. Oh, of having the fake one?
If I were to, rather than using my own Jeff Kitchaven LinkedIn account to check out, if a juror has a name like Claire Plotkin or Jeff Kitchaven, you're probably only going to find one. So you go to look for them. But if I go to look you up under my own LinkedIn account, you'll be able to tell that it was I who was looking you up.
Yes.
Are there ethical constraints on people using an alias to check people out on social media?
If you personally feel like you have an ethical constraint to do that, have someone else do it for you, or sign in under their name. I mean, I don't think so. People use aliases on social media all the time. I mean, how many people do you know that have a fake name on Facebook so people can't search them? I mean, I know so many doctors who go by different names on Facebook so that their patients can't look them up. I mean, I don't know. Where is the line drawn with social media? Are social media companies ethical? I don't know. I think do you want to go down that rabbit hole, Jeff? Really?
Well, let's go down a different one, Claire, which is that lawyers themselves put different things on social media, and mediators put different things on social media. Mm-hmm. Jurors are checking.
I think they look people up.
Jurors are
checking. They do.
Jurors are checking us out too.
For sure.
Right.
I think that jurors are told not to. I don't think they listen. I'd be willing to bet that jurors look up lawyers. I think they look up plaintiffs. So, I mean, you make sure everything is clean. There shouldn't be any pictures of your plaintiff water skiing, having fun with their friends if you're saying that she can't walk or whatever, whatever it might be. Scrub everything clean.
So that's an obvious one, right? That's like the old, those TV dramas from the 1950s when under cross-examination, the injured plaintiff being cross-examined by Perry Mason would leap out of the wheelchair excitedly, right? That doesn't really happen. Claire, what are some more subtle things that we should be looking for in the social media accounts of prospective jurors?
I mean, as someone who's looking for plaintiff cases, I mean, I love it when someone has, I don't know if you ever remember seeing if someone has changed their profile picture to reflect some sort of cause, like I stand with somebody, or, that kind of thing. I've always appreciate that. I look at like what pages they like, what clubs they're a member of, I mean, and I might scroll through to see their activities. That doesn't, but sometimes if someone is very vocal and they say a lot and they start complaining, I'll read what their complaints are about, and I have seen, unfortunately, gosh, I can't stand this. I'm stuck in jury duty, that kind of thing. I don't like that person at all. But something, a word of caution, because I know a lot of lawyers now use their social media like a ton, and they'll talk about their cases on social media. I have seen a case mistry 2 different times based on the lawyer expounding on his case and using the words insurance company on his Facebook. So, because of course, insurance is the thing we do not talk about in trial. So when you write, "I can't wait to make this insurance company pay," their Facebook, and that was an immediate mistrial. So, I mean, you have to be very careful with what you say. And that being said, I also know lawyers who get into huge political debates on their Facebooks. And, you need to be aware if your juror can search you and find that. Of course, if you're privatized, that's totally privatized, then go ahead. But if they can search you because they're a friend of a friend, keep in mind that if they're a friend of one of your friends, they can usually see more than you think on Facebook. And I've actually seen some good stuff on jurors because they happen to be friends of a friend of mine, but if they can see more about you and they can see that you're getting some sort of crazy political discussion, I mean, keep in mind, there are a lot of very conservative plaintiff lawyers, or very liberal plaintiff lawyers. And if your juror does not feel the same way as you, do you really want them to know that? Or do you want them to see you name calling on your Facebook? So you got to be very careful. I keep mine is nothing but family photos. So if a juror wants to know that I like my kids, go ahead. What else are you going to see? So, I mean, I think that's a positive. If they see that I like my kids and I spend time with my family, then that they've humanized the lawyer if they see that, and that makes them like them more, right? Than just someone staring at them. So yeah, if you want to put some nice pictures up of you and your really cute kids, I think that's a positive, personally.
And I assume the same advice would go for mediators.
Yep, I would think so.
To keep your social media posts kind of plain, professional, more narrow range of topics.
I mean, frankly, I think social media posts are such a trap for people with employment and everything that why not keep them more neutral? Truly. I mean, I know people who've lost their jobs based on their social media posts. You hear about it on news articles all the time. I mean, why bother? Save that discussion for a text if you really feel like you need to.
So it sounds like lawyers should also keep track of the social media posts of opposing lawyers.
Oh my gosh, yes, you should, for sure. That would be the first thing I would do after trials, check what they did on their Facebook. Yes, good point, Jeff.
And you would be looking for such things as talking about insurance company.
Yep, talking about the trial, making some nasty comment about you. You never know, talking about a juror. Friending a juror. You never know what they might be doing, but for sure I would keep an eye on that.
Wow.
I know, it's a whole new world. I mean, and then with the younger jurors, I mean, Facebook isn't really even used, Snapchat, Instagram. I don't know anything about Snapchat, not one bit. But if you had a younger, I don't know, associate at your firm or something, who might be able to take a look. I have yet to hear about any jurors Snapchatting their experience in the courtroom, but I guess if they did, that would be grounds to at least remove them, if not mistry the case as well. So, I mean, lately I haven't seen a single juror on their phone in trial. I used to have that problem a little more, someone who could just not put it down. But I think with these COVID restrictions, I think they're so careful to just follow the rules because they know that these rules are sort of like life and death rules, right now. So, I mean, no one's doing anything but sitting there in their mask, so people aren't really even reading books. So,
and in some trial situations, Claire, some courts are having jury trials on Zoom or one of the other online platforms, aren't they?
Right.
Well, let's talk about that. That must be a completely different experience in terms of how you select jurors and
I've done
what that means for cases.
Well, it's very interesting because there's, of course, some humongous red flags, right, to a Zoom trial. You might not get jurors who don't have any access to computers. That's unfortunate. You don't want only, super professional, literate, educated jurors. I mean, that's probably not your cup of tea, but and the other red flag I can think of, besides the not being able to stop them from using the bathroom if they go, is you can't see what they're doing on the computer, can you? You can't tell if they're Googling your case, chatting during your case. You can't tell any of that. right? I mean, and I would think if I were to have a Zoom trial, I would go in knowing that they are possibly Googling Googling you, and just make sure that you know what's on there on the internet about you or your client. I mean, we do a ton of Zoom focus groups now, which I actually really love. I think that there's a huge amount of positives as well to being on Zoom. I get to see what kind of house this person lives in. I get to see the stuff on their walls. Have I ever seen that before? No. I mean, we had a juror who had a Make America Great Again hat right behind him on his
Uh-huh.
on his side table in his bedroom. I mean,
What
I
is
never
it? It
that's
beats voir dire, huh?
I mean, there are a lot of people who are doing what I've done and they just find a wall, but for people who haven't, yeah, I mean, I had this one juror who seemed like a lovely person. She had Christmas lights in her room, and she said that she keeps Christmas lights on year round because she loves the cheer it gives her. And I was thinking, well, what a wonderful person. And would I know that if just I saw you in jury duty? Maybe not. I mean, people are they're more comfortable. I feel like they are more talkative because they haven't sat in a traffic to get to court. They haven't stood in line to get to court. They're not uncomfortable. Most of them are probably wearing sweatpants under, I feel like people they're just more comfortable in their own home. And so that's a real positive. The internet problems, of course, another negative, but yeah, the jury selection, why Zoom, I don't mind, because look at how much I can see of you here. Do you think it's probably better than how much I can see of you in a mask when you're socially distanced in a courtroom? It's significantly so.
Well, this is what we tell people about in-person mediations now as well. If we were to get together and we all had to wear masks and sit 6 feet apart, for a larger case, it would be impossible even to find a conference room big enough to hold everybody.
So true. And I have had a few lawyers tell me that they prefer Zoom depositions. They feel like they can, and so I would feel like a mediation might be similar, but they feel like they can see a person more directly. They can really get in there. I don't know if you get in your face is like a proper term, but I mean, it's just a much more closer personal contact. The only downside I've seen during focus groups, besides the Googling, is I feel like there's a hesitancy to collaborate in deliberations a little bit because you're not sitting next to a person. So, if you and I are sitting next to each other talking at a table, it's much easier for me to lean over and go, so what do you think, Jeff? When you're separated by screen boxes and you're on mute because someone has some weird ambient noise behind them and you have to click unmute before you talk, it's just not as organic or, easy in that way. I mean, it's easy for you and I to talk because it's just two of us. Picture 10 more boxes on the screen and having to navigate, is juror number 1 trying to talk, or am I trying to talk, or is juror number 4 trying to? So that's the problem I have. I've seen it in focus groups. It's hard for them to just go, oh, so what do you think? It takes a little more effort. But over several days, I think it would be fine.
So what does it mean for the kinds, if you're having a trial online on Zoom or one of the other platforms, what does it mean? What kind of jurors are better? What kind of jurors, does it change your idea of jury selection or case themes? Do some kind of themes play better online than others?
Well, as to your first question, are certain jurors better? I mean, maybe there is a demographic of older juror, or maybe juror where English is not their first language, perhaps, where a computer is very limiting to them. Like, I can't picture my father sitting on a Zoom jury trial because he can't even use a smartphone, right? That being said, my father would probably be a terrible juror in general. So I don't know. He would probably get out of jury duty in some way anyway. So maybe the cantankerous people would be cantankerous either way. You know what I mean? I'm not sure. But I will tell you this. I am surprised by the Zoom literacy among all groups. When I do focus groups, I have 75-year-olds doing Zoom, and I have 22-year-olds doing Zoom with the same level of competency, so I wouldn't have guessed that. It's just, I think it's partially because for many people that has been the way to interact with their family members throughout this pandemic. When you couldn't see anybody, grandparents were interacting with grandkids on Zoom. So it's become a necessity. It's a part of life, and so I think that it is shocking how good some older jurors are, so.
So Claire, let's go back to something you mentioned a few minutes ago, about what you see in people's backgrounds.
Right.
And the woman who had Christmas lights and was just a cheerful person.
Yes.
What kind of inferences do you draw from that, and how do you protect yourself from drawing
the wrong kinds?
The wrong kinds of inferences? I suppose there are some things that appear in people's environments which might be, there's only one way to consider. If somebody has a Nazi flag, it's like, too hot to handle, right? But if somebody has other kinds of things, Christmas lights, well, what inference?
Okay.
What are some mistaken inferences that people might draw about prospective jurors for which we have to be cautious?
Okay, so let me just say this. This is my little, disclaimer. Me saying I noticed something is different, perhaps, than your average person saying they noticed something, because I have a little bit more frame of reference for what I'm looking for, right? I've seen 150 plus trials and a lot of different people. So I might have more of a perspective based on what I like and what I don't like versus maybe what you or, someone who's just starting trying cases might feel. Okay, so the grain of salt. Okay, I'm not what I have developed is sort of my philosophy towards jurors is my unique one, right? So I would never tell somebody to think like me or be like me, because I can never 100% tell you what's going on in my mind the way that I view it, right? But I tend to believe, with regards to the Christmas lights lady, that happier jurors are better jurors. Okay.
For the plaintiff side?
For the plaintiff side.
Or just in general, in terms of their ability to pay attention?
Well, of course, in general, in terms of their ability to pay attention. But if someone who's sitting there, grimacing, hating life, they're not going to give money. They don't want to, whereas someone who, I like to say this, people who've had like really happy lives, they're devastated when they see somebody who's had something terrible happen to them. It's just, it's just a sort of a way life works, like if someone who's had a really, really, really hard life, seeing someone else have something bad happen to them doesn't bother them as much, suck it up, move on, pick yourself up and get along on your way.
So a person with a similar sort of suffering is not necessarily empathetic to
for sure. A common mistake in jury selection. So if anything, someone who's been through it before might have a unique perspective to tell other jurors that it's not as bad as you think. So there are definitely jurors who've experienced something who could be great plaintiff jurors because they feel terribly damaged and they can impart that to a plaintiff as well. But there are other people who are like, but look, I broke my back in the car accident as well, and I'm walking just fine. I've made it through. I've made it to the other end. So this whole, will they ever get better? I can tell you they can. I did, right? So, there are certain cases where, for example, abuse, like sexual or physical abuse, that kind of thing, those kinds of, it's it's tough to say because those people don't often end up on a jury anyway, but sometimes they're for you in liability, but then lower in damage because it's just not quite the same. Sometimes your imagination is always worse than the reality, right? So you might imagine, physical abuse as being something so terrible, whereas someone who's actually lived it might say, you just might have different ideas of what it's worth, right? It's so counterintuitive, but it's from what I've seen and heard, it just seems to be the truth. I mean, you'll have it in focus groups, you'll see it all the time. There'll be someone who's like, oh, this plaintiff has tons of back pain, I'm in chronic pain, I'll give them $2,000. Yeah, truly, it's interesting.
So let's go back to the idea of what's in people's homes and their environments. What are some telltale signs of one sort of inclination or another? And what are some misleading things that you might think are telltale signs, but actually you shouldn't read too much into? Anything come to mind?
Well, I don't know if I can think of any telltale signs besides perhaps memorabilia. Some sort of memorabilia that tells you one way or the other how they feel. Like I was saying, "Make America Great Again" hat, or some sort of strange posters. Like you mentioned, yes, if I saw a swastika on somebody's wall, but I think I would say for most part, it's not much more than neutral, with the exception of the fact that you just feel like you get to know them a little more. So, you might just see, oh, this person's very low. This is a very bare bones home. This person is very low income. Would you ever have known that before? Or like, oh, this person is very well read. It's just more to add to your pool of your little pot of information about each person. Would I make a decision on anybody based on their house? No, I don't think so. But like, if I saw that they, like for you, if I had a bunch of jurors who had a ton of books in their background, I would understand that I could make more literary references or something, something that you might just be a little more informed about your jury than you are seeing them from 15 feet away, 20 feet away, I would be hesitant to make any judgments based on what I see, unless it's something that's really, truly that prejudicial. So it's just more for you to get to know them, and they get to know you. That's another great point. They get to see so you can choose what they can, take away from your environment. That's one thing that's very interesting. The lawyers can pick and choose what they have behind them on their Zoom. So, do with that what you will, but you can craft your presence as much as you'd like as well.
And what are your recommendations in that regard?
I've never been asked that question. I don't know. I think that generally things that humanize you are the best, right? Like, I mean, I've noticed your elephants in the back, and I would think that, oh, maybe Jeff is well traveled, has an interest in the world.
I got them in India.
Yeah. So, and then, like, I wouldn't suggest what I, which is just nothing, but like I said, I was only doing that because my kids were asleep. But, yeah, just things that just maybe get people to like you a little, and get a little more idea about you. Everyone wants to, I think you always have a more inclination to help out somebody, if you feel like you know them a little. It's much easier to dismiss a stranger, right?
So there are some lawyers who do have in their, or mediators who have in their background sports memorabilia, or if they've posed
media politician, maybe.
Yes. Well, what about that? Let's say that you've had a chance to meet the president, and I'm not naming any particular president, but presidents can be very polarizing figures, Democrat or Republican, as you've mentioned. Political figures tend to be more polarizing today than they have been in past generations.
Yep.
And yet these are people, they're the leaders of society.
Right.
What about that sort of thing?
It's an interesting thing to think about, because I would, even more so than which president is it, it's more of a signal I'm important, So people have different philosophies on whether or not you should signal I'm important. There are certain plaintiff lawyers that would never drive their nice cars to trial. They never wear nice suits because they don't want to come across as slick and rich, right? And then there are certain plaintiff lawyers that actually think, who cares if I look like that, then they'll know I'm successful and I win a lot. So I don't know. It's two different camps. I have not really developed an opinion on the subject. I mean, I think there's something to be said for, you know, showing a modicum of success. You know, I don't think you need, but I would be a little bit worried about a president photo of just being polarizing. That would be my worry. That would be my worry. I do my best to never inject anything political, you know, just because it's such a weird, touchy issue, especially now. And I feel like if you had a president photo on your wall 30 years ago, you would be like, people would be very impressed. Now it might have some sort of weird, oh, which president is it, you know, thing, just because of how politicized we've become, you know, so.
Fascinating stuff. And do you, what about clothing? Do you look for things in how jurors are dressed on Zoom? Is it the casualness? People are more casual, I think, when they're at home.
I mean, I think that hurts defense counsel more than it hurts plaintiff counsel. I think that defense, in most cases, but in cases where there's a corporate defendant, corporations like to see corporate jurors. So if you see everybody in sweatsuits and nobody's in a suit, that takes away one of their basic ways of picking a jury, right? So, and so I don't know. I don't gauge that much on attire unless it's someone who looks like they really don't care about the world based on what they're wearing. And if they did have a, you know, shoot first, questions later, that would be, I would care about that. But, you know, some sort of slogan. I mean, I know that Harry had a trial once against Harley Davidson, and a guy showed up to jury selection the second day wearing a Harley Davidson shirt. So that was a signal that you need to pay attention to. That was an FU to the plaintiff's attorney, you know, so they pay attention to that for sure.
Got it. Claire, we have just a minute or two left. Is there anything that I should have asked or that we should be discussing?
I have one point that I wanted to bring up to you from the mediator perspective that I thought you might appreciate, that I was thinking about last night. You know, there are a lot of very, very good PI plaintiff lawyers. I'm sure you could probably think of, you know, 50 to 100, if not more, in the country that are very good and very famous, right? I cannot say the same thing about corporate defense counsel. There are not too many famous defense lawyers, right? Who have and so something to be thinking about for this next year is we will be having a deluge of trials, right? Can the handful of good defense counsel who would ordinarily try as many cases as they can in a year and push a ton back so that they can, you know, keep their calendar full of trials, can they try all these cases? I think that it's very possible that there might be a lot of less experienced. There might not be, you know, the hired guns that are always defending cases. They might not be able to do it. There might be too many cases out there for these same defense attorneys to try. So I feel like there might be a bunch of less experienced defense counsel who have to first chair cases, which might not have the best result for the defense. We'll see. It's a hypothesis, but it's a very interesting thing to think about.
Fascinating. Well, we're going to bring you back next year to say if you'll come back next year. We'd love to have you back there. In the last minute, you know, on the talk shows, when an interview ends, they always hold up the book or the record or the CD or the movie poster, and they give the guest an opportunity to plug themselves. And why don't you take a minute just telling us about your next jury?
Sure.
And what you do and how people can contact you for more information.
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough to be a self-employed jury consultant who works alongside her husband. So that's wonderful. And we do primarily plaintiff work. we do some business cases, but primarily plaintiff work. And we're based in Los Angeles, all over the country. And I mean, we help you with every aspect of trial, theme development, early focus groups to try to figure out what kind of questions to ask in your depots, witness prep, late mock trials, jury selection, you name it, we've done it. Anything to help you frame your case, pick the right jury, get a good verdict.
Great. And how do people contact you?
You can find me at claire@yournextjury.com. Our website is www.yournextjury.com. And if you wanted to reach my husband, Harry@yournextjury.com. Easy enough.